Okay, I think we'll get going. We're a few minutes past. Others might join. So, hi everyone. Welcome to this market call and to mark the release of the Open Data Standard for cyber. We've got some great speakers today on a fairly packed agenda. We'll try and get it all in within the hour, and a few speakers to give their insight on and fundamental support of this standard from their perspective. We are recording the call, so I will post it up on the Oasis YouTube channel for any of your colleagues or anyone who hasn't been able to make the call who are interested in watching the recording. So if we kick off, I'm going to just ask Dickie Whitaker, the CEO of Oasis, just to have a few minutes on introductions and everything, and then we'll start with the other speakers. Dickie.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody, and thank you for attending, and particularly thank everybody that's made a huge contribution to building this, whatever it is, fourth, I think, something like that, set of standards that we launched. I think really the only thing that I want to sort of say is to try and put some context around what we're trying to do here. I was at a market meeting earlier this week talking about liability business, and there were some people in the room who, for understandable reasons, weren't aware of some of the standards we have, and particularly weren't aware of the power that they have collectively. So while this may be about cyber, actually what it does is it adds to a body of work that started with property, then moved to liability, now cyber. And the next one we're going to be doing is going to be marine, almost certainly. And what functionally that means for all of you and the firms you work for is that actually we can have one set of open standards covering all lines of business to allow for modelers to be able to do a better job of actually bringing models with more functionality to the table, and users to do so with little extra cost in transforming the data. So that's why it's really important. It's one set of open standards that everybody can use for the benefit of all. And we just act as a convener to try and make sure that happens. So I think I just hope that that's obvious to everyone. These are living dynamic standards. People like you, users, and people who build models are secret to its success as you continue to contribute as time goes on to make sure that the standards we've got are alive and functional. And, they're your standards, you own them. So, I hope you'll join Matt and I and the rest of the Oasis team in promoting you going forward. So, Matt, I think I'll hand back to you to hear about some perspectives from some specific companies, but thank you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dickie. So I'm just going to spend just a minute or so. I'm just going to share my screen for 1 sec. So hopefully you guys can see that. It's just sort of reiterating a little bit of what Dickie has said. So just a bit on the open data standards, and it's something we've done a few of these. So maybe this is probably old news to a lot of you, and Dickie has just alluded to some of this. So open data standards is open data standard. It's not owned by Oasis. It's something we always say. It's not an Oasis standard. We just look after it and create it on behalf of you guys, the market and the insurance industry. And sounds a bit cheesy, but it is developed by the market for the market. And I think the collaboration you guys are going to hear about on this call sort of is testament to that. So it isn't something that Oasis owns. It is completely open and transparent, free to use by anyone, model agnostic, and generally designed to help solve interoperability problems and improve efficiency when it comes to cross-model analytics or data transfer or anything like that. On the screen there you see, so Oasis create it and chair the steering committee, which is made up of representatives from those companies you can see on the screen. And we have 3 or 4 committee meetings a year just to go over just general governance and updates and sign off of any updates to the schema. Everything is held on a GitHub repository, which I will spend a few minutes towards the end of the call going through, and it's completely open to use, free and accessible to anyone. So that's just my short blurb. I'll stop sharing, and we can start with the main body of the call. So I'm going to hand over to, and I need to get this right, Marco Lodedice, who is Head of Emerging Risks at Lloyds. So Marco, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. When it comes to data in cyber, we have challenges around exposure data as well as around hazard data. Industry level aggregations of any kind are still an aspiration, and most critical among us will say that output from the vendor models is also another challenge. Among several different choices of vendor models, we are called to make sense of as many modeling frameworks before we can even start discussing methodologies. And these translate inevitably to a wide range of data requirements. But different data requirements should not mean different data formats. And today we celebrate the release of the first common standard. I am especially pleased because this was achieved with the cooperation of the modeling firms who put aside their competitive position for this incredibly important piece of work. Preparing data for reinsurance submissions in any line of business is always a challenge. But in cyber, we've been at the center of a perfect storm for many years now. Data points that are crucial for one provider are optional for another, who might not even use them. Trying to navigate this minefield is an endless source of frustration for cedants who spend way too much time preparing data, and for reinsurance markets who need to make sense of that data. And so everybody ends up working with less than optimal solutions because data is always incomplete and inconsistent. As we celebrate today, we should not, however, lose sight of the main challenge ahead of us. The quest to make sense of systemic risk is not over yet. While we have a number of solutions on the table, all of which are welcome and beneficial, reaching agreement around a single modeling framework is still a dream. We don't even have alignment around which hazard parameters to use. Hazard is the final frontier for the market in cyber. In only a few years, we moved from external scans to inside-out data, and now we are starting to play with telemetry. But it's fair to say the ride is bumpy, and we are still trying to define ways of consuming larger and larger amounts of data, let alone making the data available up the risk transfer chain. Yet, the wealth of data we are collecting and starting to analyze effectively holds the key to efficient risk transfer. And the collaboration on data standards is the first turn to unlock the path towards a mature market. What we present today might look like a small step, but it is a very important one and cannot be taken for granted. I thank Dicky, Oasis, and everybody involved for making it happen, and wish they will continue the cooperation to bring more and more interoperability forward, and ultimately create the efficient risk transfer mechanisms the market is longing for. Thank you. Matt, over to you.
Marco, that was great. Thanks very much for teeing that up nicely. It was a good intro. So we've got 3 speakers from the brokers, 3 from insurers and reinsurers, and then finally we're going to finish with a few words from the model providers, a few of the model providers in the cyber modeling space. So first of all, we're going to start with the brokers. So I'm going to hand over to Simon Heather just to give his insight on this standard, and he is head of cyber cat modeling at Gallagher Re. So Simon.
Thank you, Matt. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'm going to try and not just parrot exactly what Marco said, but yeah, he really does cover a lot of what the problem is. Cyber has a data problem, not just poor data, but too much data. You've got all these technologies that have the ability to go beyond the traditional underwriting questionnaires, but there's very little guidance or has been around what is important and what is critical. The launch of the OED is actually very well timed. Placing markets are crying out for better and consistent data. And this is what the OED gives us, like universal minimum data language, that we can start using across all markets, and particular in newer markets like the ILS, which we're just opening up, which require much more data-driven and expect a minimum uncertainty. So communicating risk to them is becoming more and more important. Personally, I feel that as a cyber market, we've reached this sort of tipping point where model adoption and sophistication is really picking up pace. And future-proofing data practices is going to be really advantageous to sort of encouraging better practice, accessing new capital, and also really assisting with a range of underwriting and risk management tools that aren't really available to traditional property classes. I actually only made the move over to cyber a few years back, but I bring these experience of NatCat modeling with me, and actually when I first started to get my hands on cyber data, I was a bit shocked by the data quality. It's almost like we'd forgotten these lessons we learned over a decade ago, and the rubbish in, rubbish out, although that's the polite version of the models, seem to have just gone and missed, and without, and anecdotally, and hopefully the fellow brokers will agree, some of the cyber data out there is surprising. People can even underwrite with it. It's that bad, and in fairness, and not to upset all my clients, collecting good quality data for cyber has been frustrated over the years by sort of these moving goalposts of what is cyber, definitions of risk, disparate covers between carriers, which have only really started to coalesce, and the cyber fields that often won't fit into legacy policy admin systems designed for sort of the more straightforward classes. But again, this is where the OED has really come in at a good point. It can really start helping. It is a collaboratively developed market view of data requirements. So nobody's trying to tell what other people need to do. It's kind of, this is what we've agreed on. Would be good to communicate between each other. So it gives a foot up to new entrants with little experience in data quality collection, but also a really strong incentive, I think, for established companies to up the ante. The fields in the OED aren't just about capturing better policy terms or minimum policy terms. We've tried to incorporate sort of key firmographic and technographic fields. Firmographic fields such as URLs are hugely under-recorded within the market, yet they are key for accessing OI technologies, and equally company identifiers such as the LEI and the DUNS, which frankly should be a much broader adoption across the market because they remove all uncertainty in company identification within models and between clients. These are sort of being incorporated in the OED and will really bring up that minimum level across the market. But as well, there's also technographic stuff, which is traditionally quite tricky to record, but at least it's going to give direction to people who adopt the OED into the key drivers of claims frequency within their portfolio. And finally, before I take up way more time than probably allowed, but vendor model evaluation is becoming a hot topic, especially for all my clients. There's a lot of complaints out there that evaluating models or comparing models is impossible because you can't, the models don't converge or produce wildly different outputs. But so many of those cyber models are quite immature or still developing, and they're very, very, very sensitive to this primary data. So unless we get a good quality standard of data, we're not going to be able to really dig into these models beyond just speculative numbers don't match what we like. So it's really, we're really supporting the release of this from Gallagher, and we're really looking forward to encouraging and incorporating it into the submissions going forwards.
That's great. Thank you, Simon. Some great words. Just for people on the call, if you do want to submit some questions, you can do it through the chat, and we will take some time throughout the call to read out the questions and answer as many as we can. So do feel free to stick some questions in there. So following Simon, we now have David Arthur, who's head of UK non-specialty actuarial at Guy Carpenter. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. So I guess so following on from Simon's comments, I would say that within Guy Carp, the person that's been leading the Guy Carp engagement with the open data standards for cyber is actually Jamie Pocock, who is able to make today. So I'm going to make some comments more broadly around the benefits that we think that open data standards make with regard to cyber, but also in general as they apply across the industry. GC do support the development of these data standards, as we've talked about, so particularly as they apply to cyber. but also I've been involved in lines, as Matt mentioned earlier, the liability data standard that was released around this time last year. And we support these standards because they bring a number of benefits that we can benefit from as an industry and also within the individual companies that we work for. So in particular on cyber, a number of the benefits are sort of broader industry things that will apply. The language and some of the technical requirements for cyber are complex. They're also quite new to a lot of people, and there's a number of specialists involved in cyber, but not everybody that works in or that touches the cyber class is necessarily an expert. But defining some of the language that's used, the being more rigorous around the terms that we employ, is a particular benefit, making it more easy to get people's understanding aligned with the risks that are being taken. When we're passing risks from one carrier to another, ensures that there's a bit more common understanding, and therefore allows a bit more innovation in how we actually go about transacting that sort of deal. In order to, once we've got that shared common understanding, there's a number of other benefits just around more sort of, you might say, more prosaic kind of process related work, where there's a number of models and a number of alternative models within the cyber space. Having a single schema, if it were widely adopted, that is agnostic to the model being employed, allows process efficiencies in terms of being able to use a single source of information for potentially more than one different types of model. It allows investment in handling the data, so that, for example, if you're able to expect data in a particular format, that you can then efficiently transpose and convert that into the data into the format that you need in order to complete the modeling. And it also frees up time to then be more thoughtful about the analytics and how we actually understand the information, and potentially even freeing up space to develop additional ways that you could potentially look at the data. Again, if you're able to expect data to be provided in a particular format and it's consistent across client, it gives you the ability to achieve better return on investment from more modeling techniques. It also gives the ability to use similar sorts of approaches across a number of clients, potentially, if clients are able to understand the value of that information that's being provided. Which kind of brings on to the sort of the final point I wanted to make, which is that cyber is relatively immature class of business in the context of the overall P&C market. Premium growth is significant year on year. It's been growing rapidly for a number of years and will continue to do so. And I guess that to a degree illustrates that there's a degree of underinsurance in the market as this product develops. And the availability of a shared data standard allows people to then build on some of the work that others have done and do some of the innovation that we need in order to develop products and solutions for the clients that we deal with day to day. And I guess in particular, one of the benefits of having an open source standard, as we're talking about today, is that it's kind of able to switch from one to another model. There's no kind of, we're not tied into a very specific approach, which is going to be then what we need to use forevermore. It gives you the ability to switch. It gives you the ability to innovate, and it should hopefully allow the market to evolve in the best way that it possibly can. And on that, I think I'll hand back to you, Matt.
Great, thanks very much, David. Just one more broker. So I'll hand over to Mark Lynch, who's head of cyber innovation at Aon, and then we can maybe take some questions if there are any after the brokers. So Mark, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks to Simon and David. I think we covered off quite a lot of the key points we're wanting to discuss here, but I wanted to maybe kind of shift the focus ever so slightly to the wider context of the cyber market. So, as you're all aware, everyone on the call here, we've seen quite a lot of material change in the last 2 years. Significant re-underwriting of portfolios, significant growth in this space. And we're probably at a point now, at least in the next 2 to 3 years, if we want to continue to grow, we want to continue to serve our clients and reduce that sort of uninsured population within the economy, we need more capital in the market. And one of the problems with cyber is the barriers for entry in terms of the information and understanding required are currently too high for a number of alternative capital players, but also a number of traditional P&C players who would like to enter this space, but need to effectively be walked through that process. And one big part of that is this variety of data capture techniques and variety of data schemas that are available in the market. So if we can get to a point where we can converge on a standardized open source data schema, then we can alleviate at least one of those barriers of entry to allow us to unlock more capital to continue to grow. And I think that's absolutely vital for us to continue this process. The other thing that it allows us to do is it allows us to more sustainably validate the models that we get. So if we can capture multiple different variables that we can then play back and put into the RMS model, the science model, the CyberCube model, and cover model, we can much better sense check and do those sort of sensitivity analyses that right now take quite a lot of work and conversion and time to do. A number of our clients come to us and say, we can capture these 3 or 4 variables. It's difficult to extract from our underwriting system. So which variable is going to move the dial the most when it comes to the actual final results of the PML? So we've got to be able to articulate that to our client base. We've got to articulate what is actually vital beyond the standard revenue industry and limits to allow us to actually dig deeper and get to the position where we all want to get to, where cyber looks more like the property class, where we've got sufficient Solvency II rigor behind that particular framework. So that's something I'd love to see us get to, and I think this data standard gets us part of the way there. The final thing I wanted to mention as well is we are in a position in the cyberspace compared to P&C where we do have multiple vendors. It's not a commoditized class like, let's say, property cat in some spaces. You do have very, very different views on the risk. And again, one of the ways in which those conversations get obscured is because, let's say, coverage data doesn't necessarily match between different vendors. So you're not always doing an apples to apples comparison. And so this frustration that sits within the modeling community can be dissipated if we can get to a position where we have a common language that talks to all the vendors in this space. So overall, I think it's a sign of the maturity of the class, and it's a step that we need to get to in order to unlock more capital, in order to mature, and actually to get to a position where everyone who's in this space is comfortable with the underlying methodology of the major model vendors in this space. That was me. So pass back to you, Matt.
That was great. Thank you very much, Mark. Before we move on, I suppose with any of these sort of market initiatives and trying to adopt things in the market, having the brokers on board is always quite key, because without you guys, it makes it even harder. So I appreciate your comments today, and I think the positive acceptance that you guys think, and you see the benefit of this standard, I think is really quite a strong message for the market and people on the call. I can't see any questions in the chat, so there might be more that come through. I think maybe I don't have a question and statement. I suppose one of the key things for you guys is to want and to really recommend this schema to your clients and as a data format for them to be using. It's sort of a lot of that sits with you guys as brokers. So I think that's a really strong message. So we'll move on. We've now got a few speakers who will spend a few minutes to talk about this standard from their perspective in the insurance and reinsurance space. So next up we have Peter Zimmerli, who's the cyber risk manager at Axis Capital. So Peter, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Matt. I hope you can hear me. Excellent.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Thank you. So when I was sort of thinking what I could say during this call, I was thinking back to when over a year ago, the sort of news spread that there would be an open data standard in the cyber area. And I remember my reaction at that time was that I instantly felt absolutely compelled and convinced that I should join this effort in order to help the industry sort of define some minimum standards around cyber data. Now, the reason for this is quite obvious, and I think a couple of the speakers before me have already mentioned this. I was also joining, like Simon, from a property cat side, so used to natural catastrophe exposure data, where essentially 20 years ago, subsequently, there was an increase in quality and also sort of vigor around what is the data that we actually need in the industry in order to really be able to look at that exposure and that risk in a comprehensive and holistic way. And I think when I first sort of a couple of years ago was exposed to cyber business, cyber risk, and looked at exposure data that was available, even internal, but also external exposure data on the reinsurance side, I was just also taken aback by the fact that I felt, wow, this feels like 15, 20 years ago on the property cat side. There's no standardization. There's sort of no common ground the industry has in order to talk to each other. Obviously, from my point of view, sort of managing risk, the important things of why we actually need that exposure data are very similar to what we have on the NatCat side. So on one hand side, obviously, you want to have a good grasp on exposure data in order to control your accumulation, so to really have a good grip on the business that you're writing. Now, on the insurance side, again, that's rather straightforward, but on the reinsurance side, it becomes very important to have sort of a common data standard based on which you can actually compare what you're taking on your book of business. So this accumulation control, which then leads into steering your business and optimizing your portfolio, that's the one important point. And the second important point, obviously, cyber being a systemic cat tail risk, as property NatCat is, it's very important when it comes to try to use exposure data in order to model what your tail risk is looking like, and to determine what kind of premium you need to charge for that, and what kind of reserves or what kind of capital needs to underlie that business. So in that sense, for me, really super core to have that common language. I think I'm very excited about this day, about being able to release that standard now. We've had a couple of meetings, not heated discussions, I would say, but quite a few back and forward discussion in terms of how we should define this standard. The way I look at it is really now, I think we have a very good sort of what I would call minimum requirements when it comes to the quality of data, the amount of data, the scope of data that we in the market would sort of expect as a common ground to talk to each other when we want to exchange information about cyber business we're writing. So super excited to have that. Also super excited sort of on behalf of Axis Capital to confirm that we from Axis Capital really support this standard, and we really will encourage our clients, broking community to use this standard whenever we're compiling cyber exposure data and when we're exchanging exposure data. So with that, I think, Matt, that was what I wanted to say. Back to you.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. I love the enthusiasm, and we appreciate your your positive words. Now, I understand there might be, some repetition on this from the different speakers, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this is generally to get a really positive message around this standard and sort of, as Peter has done really well, generate a bit of excitement. How exciting can data standards be? Well, let's make them exciting if we can. So my the next speaker is Gemma Smythe, who's the Cyber Exposure Manager from Sompo International. So over to you, Gemma.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so again, maybe some repetition, but I think this is important. We see open data standard as being important. I think a few people in this call have probably been around the block in NatCat, and we can take the mistakes that we've done in NatCat and potentially benefit from those in creating a standard in quite early days of the market. I mean, I think from a NatCat perspective, I think the market has been held back from its full potential in not having a consistent data set and spending time in translating data sets, which is just totally unnecessary, really. And I think if you ask anyone in NatCat, they would ask for a clear, consistent data standard that was defined early on. So cyber has an opportunity now not to make those same mistakes and have something early on. And I think it's really good that this has been carried out by Oasis, central market support. So it's not necessarily anchored around one particular model. So a company aren't incentivized to use a data standard for a particular model and stay with that model. So it's good that it has collaboration from across the market and is not done by a model vendor. I think for me, one big thing is about the communication of the data standard. Like, we could build the best data standard ever, but if it's not used, then it's likely that there may be duplication by another well-meaning outfit, and there's going to be a clash, and again, not actually getting to what we want to achieve. And I would say, from working on the standard, I think, you know, there's no doubt that a data standard is the answer. Whether or not it is 100% successful, it may not be, but it sends a clear and early message to the market that this is the approach we want to take, and this is a baseline to be built upon. And then all future efforts can be to enhance the data set rather than a fractured approach that we've seen potentially before with inconsistencies. So yeah, I think we fully back this. I think it's about the marketing and having this out there for people to use. And I think it will grow and develop in time and be something that's really important to us. And that's all from me.
That's great, Gemma. Thank you very much. You touched upon a few things there that us certainly at Oasis try and do with the whole open source, multi-model open platform. And the OED has been around, I think most of you know, for 4 or 5 years for property, and it is something we are trying to push for the NatCat area. And again, you know, this is the first version, and I might say it again on the call 2 or 3 times. This is the first version. We don't, for once, think this is an exhaustive, definite, done, tick the box, let's all go home. This is the first version, and we hope once you guys in the market get behind it and adopt it, then it will be developed. You know, it'd be great in a few weeks' time, someone sends me an email and says, Matt, been using the standard, it's really helpful so far, but we think it's missing X, Y, and Z. Brilliant. That's exactly what we want to hear, which means, you know, it develops further and further. And a few of you have said already that cyber is still in its infancy and it is developing all the time. So it needs to be extensible and it needs to accommodate those quick changes. So I'll maybe talk a little bit about governance and next steps and how we look after it going forward. But before that, I'll pass over to the third person that I have for insurance. This is David Baxter, who's Vice President and Head of Exposure Management at Renaissance Re. So David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt. And actually, I'd like to just start off by saying thanks to both you and Oasis for providing the space and organization to develop this work. It's a non-trivial amount, and it's useful having that centralized place to do that. With respect to our view, at Renaissance Re, we've long championed data standards, in particular open data standards. I mean, a lot of the speakers have already gone through a lot of the benefits already put forward, so I'll keep this relatively brief. But you know, we really do believe that open data standards are an important tool in getting the right data both quickly, efficiently, and accurately. They have the potential to significantly reduce frictional costs associated with reinsurance transactions, particularly with new lines like cyber, where everything's being developed at quite a pace and everyone's trying lots of new ideas. But yeah, from our perspective, seemingly every exposure data set we receive requires bespoke and manual adjustment into a standardized format that just so that we can actually then analyze it. And this often leads to the need for clarification or resubmission, and so prolonging that turnaround times. So we really do believe that the use of data standards like this give benefits to both us, but also to our clients. Also, really like the open nature of standards. I think it was mentioned earlier. There's a lot of barriers to changing what data you receive and send out, and the real benefit of that open standard is that it just takes one more barrier away. It's available to all risk carriers, intermediaries, vendors, everyone alike. We see that as a key benefit. And while this is the first step in this particular cyber standard, we believe exposure managers across the industry will really benefit from the adoption and the engagement with this initiative, and as we all rise to the challenge of delivering improved cyber risk analysis and reporting. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. I mean, I know RenRe were also quite heavily involved in the liability schema that we did last year. So we obviously appreciate your support. So just getting towards, we've got a few more speakers now for the model providers this side. So I'm going to hand over to Matt Harrison, the first of those guys from the model vendors. So Matt is Director of Product and Product Management for Cyber at RMS, or sorry, Moody's RMS. So I thought I'd put that in there. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Firstly, it's I'm 7th, 8th in the queue. It's getting pretty difficult to say something original, but there's still 2 people after me, so I feel even more sorry for them. I think there's arguments right either way. Obviously, it's clearly useful to reduce frictional cost in the market. But it's also clearly useful to us as we're all in a kind of a still nascent field. I hate saying that. I feel as though we say it all the time, but it's true. By agreeing to a common set of standards, it makes it easier for people to know what data to capture. So it makes it easier either to the kind of interoperability. It's certainly beneficial to reinsurers that there's less data transformation. Data transformation always results in errors, bad model results. I think it's an interesting one, obviously, where because we're still in that nascent part of the development, in some ways it's been easier. The standards probably aren't that ambitious, really. We still had some interesting debate in plenty of the meetings. But now was the right time, because I think where we see certainly in property cat, there's essentially IP encoded into some of the data standards where we've been able to kind of beat that hurdle where the IP hasn't been encoded into the data standard to start with. So it's in some ways it's been easy. I hate being a depressive. I do think the challenges are probably to come, because I think it's going to be, as we start to think about secondary modifiers more and how we think about other descriptors in cyber. Cyber is a lot of the observable metrics that we see about cyber are more relative rather than true objective measures of the risk, and therefore how we come to a standard way to either interpret that objectivity or our ability to kind of enforce objective descriptions will be, I think, where the fun starts. And I think that's both from the kind of the technographic side, but also from the coverage side. I think we had more arguments around coverage than we did around technographic data, which, is something in NatCat that we never really had to worry about. With kind of, buildings, contents, business interruption, right, let's go to the pub. It's sort of, we've got a long, there's a lot more variance in cyber, and there still is variance. But anyway, we're delighted to be supporting it. We want to make things easy for the industry. We're going to be natively supporting it from our next release. We've been chomping at the bit, waiting for this to be done and dusted, so we knew what we were going to put in our next release. So yeah, we'll continue to support this as much as we can going forward. And yeah, that's it from me.
Thanks a lot, Matt. It's great to hear RMS's support for this. It's really it's a good message. Next we have Wenlu Zhang, Director of Data and Analytics at Cyber AccuView. So Wenlu, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Can everyone hear me okay?
Okay, yeah, absolutely fine.
Great. So good morning and good afternoon. And first of all, thrilled to be here and have this opportunity to speak about this exciting initiative. And for those who are not familiar with Cyber AccuView, I'll just run a few quick words without stating too much of the spotlight here. So we are a consortium, and that was founded by 8 leading cyber insurers back in the summer of 2021. So, and our mission is really to enhance the cyber risk mitigation effort across the industry, and to provide value and services back to our members and to the connected economy at large. One of the areas that we try to focus on is the data standardization and definitions. And so our goal is really to help create by collaborating with Oasis and all the other companies here that involved in the development of this data schema to create a common language that will help the industry. At CyberIQView, we believe we recognize the importance of the standardization of the data. And we believe that an open data standard for cyber is really beneficial as it promotes the transparency. As multiple people before me have mentioned, transparency, consistency, cost effectiveness as it reduces the cost of transforming the data, ensuring the compatibility. It also promotes the accessibility to make sure that it reaches to a wider range of the organization. So I think by collaborating with Oasis and the market is really a important step for all of us. So in the conclusion, I think at CyberIQView, we believe collaboration is the key to address complex challenges. And we're excited about this launch, and we're committed to work with Oasis and all the other industry key stakeholders to address this complex issue. So yeah, back to you, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Wenli. And so the final speaker we have, before I'll spend a couple of minutes just showing you what a spreadsheet looks like, because we don't know what a spreadsheet looks like, is Shai Yanofsky, who's the CTO at Cover Cyber Risk Quantification. So Shai, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, man. And I totally agree with Matt Harrison. It's really hard to be original at this point. I'm following this effort for a while now through Peter Dyson, who is leading our analytics team, and he participated in that effort. And we as well, super excited to see that coming into fruition. I would also share that we just concluded our customer event when we got to bring together people from insurance or insurance brokers and cyber risk professionals and enterprises. And actually, if I got €1 for every time the issue of data standardization was raised, so well, it wouldn't buy me a house, but at least a fancy dinner. So if I had them recorded, it could be a great testimonial now just for that effort. And it was just very authentically sharing the pains and things that would preventing or making it harder to collaborate within that field. So I'm sure that many people in the industry will be happy to enjoy those efforts. I would add on another point that coming from the cyber side of things, I saw how through the last probably 20 years was some kind of standardization of the facts in the cyber side of things. So things like standardizing a way to talk about IOCs or the MITRE framework that standardized the way to describe the attacks. So again, it's very technical. It's on the other side of the modeling, but the gains of having a shared vocabulary, a common agreed vocabulary that is enabling people to collaborate and bring their own piece into the very big puzzle is invaluable. It's huge. And it's very exciting to see that thing happening down the stream of the very higher level of modeling thing. And I think that we actually owe it to ourselves. That's like when we're dealing with cyber, inherently we have the adversary part, which are putting a lot of effort to make things hidden, to make things misleading, to make things complicated. So denoising whatever in our control is something that we just own ourselves, we own the industry. And I'm super excited to see this project doing that and pushing us to the right direction. So thank you very much for that.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Shai. And thanks to all the speakers. I think the message is clear, right? We all know, the benefits. You've all really articulately highlighted those. And I think just the next steps now, how to take this forward. Before we take any questions or maybe just have a slight discussion at the end, I'm just going to share my screen and just go through a few things. So hopefully you can see that. I'll just move this out of the way. Sorry. So hopefully you can see that. So a lot of so what we did, to get this cyber standards across the line about a year ago, I set up a working group, and since then we've had sort of maybe 5 or 6 calls on Zoom, and we've all got together and just sort of thrash this out. And I just wanted to give the recognition to those companies, and most of them are on the call now and have just spoken, and those are the companies that were involved in the development of this. And I think recognition is important for you guys to show that the efforts have gone in. It has been, as many of you have said, a completely collaborative approach. I know virtually nothing about cyber. My model background is completely NatCat, and I've been at Oasis and sort of out of the core market for a few years. So I didn't bring much to the table in regards to knowledge. So it was very much down to you guys. I was just there to sort of chair it and bring you all together and hopefully guide it in a way, but it's completely at the huge thanks to you guys. So I appreciate it. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to come out of here if I can, and just go to the actual standards. So this is not just for cyber, this is the open data standards. It's all held on a GitHub repository, and I can send out links and everything. And like I said, this is going to be uploaded to the Oasis YouTube channel, so there will be links in the description, and you can go there, and your non-cyber NatCat colleagues and liability colleagues can also have a look at these data standards if they're not aware of them. So generally, as an initiative, we are pushing this across all lines of business. So just some information, if you just go to the repository here, and again, I apologize if most of you know this. So this is the open exposure data. There is another separate repository for open results data, but that's a separate thing for ODS. We'll just stick to exposure for now. If you just click on open exposure data, cyber, and it's got some information here for you guys to look at, all of the collaborators, the rationale, and some notes about the approach we took, and also some considerations. And I would encourage you all to read these considerations and these sort of points. They're also on the schema, which I'll show you in a sec, because they do highlight a lot of the things that guys have talked about, but also where and how we think the schema should be used. Mainly, a lot of the stipulations, and they're probably caveats to say that ODS takes no responsibility for the population of this. This is completely on the onus of the user and you guys. So what we've done is we've tried to guide and support you how you might fill it in, but essentially it's completely up to you of how you use this schema. What we want to do is develop it, but the use of it is completely down to you guys in the market. And if there's any breaches of contract when it comes to separate databases that you want to use, whether you're licensing DUNS or LEI or anything, again, that's completely the responsibility of you guys, and ODS don't take any responsibility for that. More information on technographic and formats and things like that, and some next steps. So I encourage you to read them. And now I'm going to show you the exciting spreadsheet we came up with. So it's nothing attractive, it's nothing sexy, it's really quite basic and simple, although it's not, in a way. The hard thing is getting everyone together, getting the right people together around the table, and really discussing and highlighting the key data fields. So like, Matt so nicely put it, there were a few, I don't know if they were heated discussions, but we had discussions back and forth, mainly around coverages and mainly around the technographic side. So again, those considerations are on the README tab, and the main crux of it are these, just make that a bit smaller, is this tab here, which is all of the data fields. And we've separated them into categories for policyholder information, financial terms, coverages, and also a bit of technographic. So a lot of this was taken from the liability schema, because obviously there's certainly around the policy information, there's a lot of crossover between cyber and liability. And so we weren't starting completely from scratch. We were sort of using the liability as a sort of template, and we've just developed it out. So fairly straightforward, all of the fields, the description where we've tried to recommend a format. because down the line, we're hoping that automation increases in the market and this data could become machine readable. So we want to try and be as unambiguous as we can and just be quite prescriptive where we can and say, this is the format you need to be capturing. Standard policy financial terms, I won't go into that. I mean, the main conversation is around these coverages, and early discussions, there was like, I think I was sent a list of about 20 different coverages in cyber. And someone said, well, why don't we just try and build that out? And then we sort of, as a working group, we got together and we thought, well, maybe we should try and condense it. You know, why should we have 20, 30, 40 coverages when we can maybe have 8 to 10 and have sub coverages within that, and they capture those coverages there and those sub limits and deductibles. So that's all the information. And on the coverages, what we've done is we've come up as a group with these short coverage codes, or acronyms, I suppose. Well, they're not acronyms, but business interruption, contingent, digital assets, extortion, financial fraud, and all of these incident response liability. And they're the codes that we're sort of insisting that are used or are named for the data fields here. So when you're populating those coverages, we've just come up with a simple, you insert your monetary value where you have that value in the policy for a sublimit or deductible, or you put 1 in if you know the coverage is covered by the policy, but you haven't got an explicit monetary value, or you leave it 0 and blank if it is excluded. And we're just finding this is a simple, fairly simple way of just capturing those coverages. And so, I mean, it's all there, and obviously, I'll send the links out and you can all access it yourself. Technographic information. So this was another area of slight contention, just because we are trying to accommodate the whole market, or as much of the market as we can, and there's different users for this. So we're trying to accommodate a lot of different user requirements in this. And so the question was, is it worth even putting anything in there? These are considered aspirational. The market doesn't generally capture it very well. And what they do capture isn't very detailed, and it's probably not worth doing it as a first version. What we came up with was 5 or 6 key fields, which certainly the reinsurers were a bit more vocal about in regards to they're useful for basic analytics, accumulation analytics especially. And so we thought, okay, well, let's try and capture just some basic technographic in there. And this is the area I think we agree is probably the biggest room for development in next versions of this schema. And so some of the technographic stuff, was to get the main vendors for your operating systems, for your cloud, for your email, and for your customer relation management. And again, there are obviously more out there that aren't in here, but this was just a way of getting 95% of those key vendors into a schema and to capture the data. So just an example here where you would call it OS1, so your policy, so you've got Windows or Apple or whatever, and they just basically associate with these codes. And that was, there are huge questions around the detail and the accuracy of the data captured, and I've put some in the README here. And the questions were, is the cloud or email provider the same for all servers within a company? Right, so if you've got a large global company, they might use different operating systems, different servers, different email providers. So how do you then, you can start to see there's a massive rabbit hole you can start going down. But what we've done is the first version to say the main email provider, the primary operating system that your company uses, just as a sort of middle ground to try and get at least some of that information, even though we know it's not perfect and it can be better. So I will stop that. I think we're all a bit giddy with the excitement of looking at a spreadsheet. So I will stop. And so there's a few minutes left. I can't see any questions, but I sort of have a question, I think, to the speakers. And so I won't put anyone specifically on the spot. But I suppose my question is, so what do we think is next for this, right? So let's hope that the market start using this, and 6 months time, we've had some feedback and things like that. What do you think, as the experts, is the best place to take this standard forward? It might not be an easy question, but I don't know. Is anyone willing to answer that?
I'll have a go because I'm a big mouth and I like talking. I mean, I think we have to keep the communication up because we, you know, we've clearly all articulated that this is a new space. You know, we're not trying to do the RMS plug, but, you know, we try and push out 2 versions a year. So we'll be looking for new data fields, and we need to keep, you know, I think we need to be pretty, if we're going to support an open standard and we're as an industry, we're going to work towards it, we have to have clarity about what's coming. And we have to have clarity as an industry what's coming and what we're all thinking. And that might give away some of the secret sauce. But if we don't, the open standard soon uses utility. And if it uses utility, it's dead. And all the things that we've talked about and we all got really excited about disappear. So we, you know, I still think this is very much the beginning rather than the end of the standard. And then it's probably for everyone else on this call to kind of engage with it and try and support it as much as possible. I think the more that we keep talking and the more it's used, the more it will evolve. I mean, I think if we were here in 2 years' time and it didn't look quite radically different, I'd probably be quite surprised.
Yeah, I think just quickly on that, I realize time is a bit short, but in regards to the governance, I think the idea is that we need to maintain a version. So we want people to go and use this, but if then they're inserting their own fields and generally changing it, you're going to have duplications and multiple versions of the standard, which is not what we want. So if a company is using it and want to do that, they need to feed back to us and say, look, this needs to go into the the maintained version of the standard. And that's what we do with property. And so I think as a next step, what we would do is to look to set up a steering group that then feeds into the main steering group of ODS for cyber. And, you know, a lot of you guys can sit on that. And just so we then agree on updates and feedback and stuff that comes in. And that's a way to centralize that communication. And I think having 3 or 4 quarterly meetings a year, maybe on this, assuming there is something to steer and the market is using it, then I think that's a way, because we've heard from property where someone's going, oh, we've been using OED for 3 years and we've got loads of different fields that you haven't got. It's like, well, then that's not the standard. That's your standard and it's not the market standard. So we need to, that's sort of where Oasis's role comes in with the management of that, just because you need to have one operational version. Otherwise it just becomes chaotic and not standard. I don't have anything else to add. I can't see any questions. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, but maybe our message was clear. Dickie, do you have anything you wanted to add before we say goodbye?
Oh, really? Just thank you all. Thank you, Matt, too. I think it's great. Let's get people get on.
Great.
Use
and
it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dickie. And I think it's up to all of you guys to really, you know, push this in the marketplace and get adoption going. And like Matt said, I hope in 2 years' time, I hope it does look radically different and it's, you know, accommodating everyone's needs and making everything easier. So this is just the start, and let's really push it, talk about it at webinars, talk about it in seminars, talk about it at conferences, and really push it. And let's make the cyber world great. Okay, thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate all of you attending, and speak to you soon. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.